Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training we are going to be going over the skills of matching and mirroring. So I'm super pumped to go ahead and share with you exactly what it is that we are going to be talking about inside of this training. So just as a reminder, what we are doing is we are continuing our theme of the art of transformation, and we are learning the skills to become an amazing coach who can influence and guide others through their transformation, as well as guiding yourself through self-coaching. And so inside of this training, we're going to be going over the third coaching skill, which is matching and mirroring. Now, a quick note as we go ahead and start this training is I do want to go ahead and welcome you. I want to welcome you into the Elite Club. What is this Elite Club that you ask? Well, this elite club is the fact that less than 2% of the population has ever had any formal training in listening skills. I want you to think about that for a second. Less than 2% of the population has ever learned anything regarding listening and how to actually listen, okay? And so few people have ever learned these valuable life skills that you are going through right now. And so this is why this is going to radically transform your life and the life of everyone else that you interact with for the rest of your life. And so that, ladies and gentlemen, is why these trainings and why these skill sets are so valuable and important, because so few people have these skills. And so when you acquire these skills, you are going to become infinitely more valuable to the entire society, which includes your family and everyone else that you interact with for the rest of your life. And so that is why I wanted to go ahead and welcome you into that very elite club. So welcome. Now, as we go ahead and get this party started, we do have the training outline there in the beginning of the guide, so that way it is easy to reference in the future. And so let's go ahead and jump right into it. Well, the first question is, what is matching and mirroring? Great question. So matching and mirroring are actually two ways to be able to build with your students something called rapport, okay? Now, rapport looks like it is pronounced as report, but rapport is actually pronounced rapport with a silent T. And so in order for us to be able to understand exactly what matching and mirroring are, because matching and mirroring is what we use in order to build rapport, we are first going to have to talk very briefly about what rapport actually is. And so the real question right in the beginning of this training is, what is rapport? And so here's my question for you is, have you ever felt so in sync with someone that you are in the flow with them and that feelings, thoughts, and ideas are communicated so easily back and forth, right? You feel like you are in a synergy with the other person. Well, that is exactly what rapport is. And so getting into rapport or building rapport is when you are so in tune with another person that you feel in sync with them, right? And so the textbook definition of rapport is a close, harmonious relationship in which people are in sync with each other, understand each other's feelings or ideas, and communicate smoothly. And so some people who don't understand the skills of coaching, some people who don't understand the art of transformation, think that, some people are born being good at that kind of stuff, right? Some people are just naturally good at working with people. But the truth is that getting into rapport and building rapport is actually a skill that you can learn that will allow you to be able to build trust between yourself and another person effortlessly. And do you remember what the definition of a skill is? Yes, we talked about that, is that skill equals knowledge times reps. And so when you learn the knowledge of how to get in sync with someone throughout these trainings, and then you go out there and you put in enough reps, you put in enough action, right? That's another word for reps is action, is that you will then also acquire the skill of being a quote unquote people person. And so then when people actually say, wow, you're so good with people, you're so talented, I don't know if I can do that, you're going to laugh because you know that it was only because you acquired the knowledge and then put it into action that you acquired the skill of actually how to be a people person. How cool is that, right? That is very, very cool. And so it's time to get rid of those disempowering identity statements that you may have, that people around you might have, that you can now explain is, hey, when people say, hey, I'm not good with people, we talked all about that in module 2. Throw those identity statements in the trash because they do not serve you and where it is that you are trying to get to, all right? And so that is a brief overview of what rapport actually is. But you might have the question, okay, now that I understand what rapport is, but why is it even important? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. Why is rapport important? Here's what you need to understand, and here is what great coaches and RWPs understand, is that if rapport is not present in a coaching relationship, then the student will resist any coaching and they will not get the results that they want. Why? Because rapport is the key to building trust. Rapport establishes trust and indicates to the other person, hey, you are safe here. You are with people who know and like you, okay? And if trust is not present, then the student's armor goes up instead of coming down. And so rapport opens the channel of communication between the person to not feel on guard or threatened in a conversation. It helps them feel that there is no threat in this space. And so rapport establishes that trust and opens the door to vulnerability. In the end, without rapport, no coaching or transformation technique will ever work. And so the bottom line is this: because rapport is the key to building trust, getting into rapport with someone is the first essential step in any successful human interaction, not only in coaching, but in life as a whole, period. Very, very critical and very, very, very important to be able to understand. And like I said many, many times, is that this module is not going to only develop you as a coach, as an RWP for your career and for your profession, but is going to make you a force to be reckoned with as a human being. So that way you are so valuable to everyone that you come across. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the beautiful thing about this profession. The beautiful thing about this industry is that you are going through your own personal growth, both professionally and personally, which is very, 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 very awesome. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk very briefly about rapport gone wrong. I want to go ahead and give you an example of when you are out of rapport, what actually happens, right? Because when you are out of rapport, what ends up happening is that the other person will feel like they are not safe and they will do anything in order to protect themselves in the interaction. And so sometimes that looks like being defensive, right? Have you ever met anybody who was defensive, right? And so as a result, it's because they didn't feel safe within that interaction. They didn't feel safe with what was going on, right? And so this might manifest itself with the other person actually maybe shutting down, maybe lashing out, right? Depending on how their limbic brain responds. It might be fighting, it might be about flighting, it might be about freezing, right? All of those things. And so in the case of a coaching interaction, when you lack rapport with a student, the student may get very short in their answers. They will have difficulty understanding your questions. They might resist answering your questions as well, right? And so all of these are indications and signs and symptoms of not being in rapport, right? They don't feel safe to be able to answer those questions with you. And so this happens because there wasn't enough rapport developed to be able to allow the other person to relax. And so what's happening is that their subconscious limbic mind is telling them fight, flight, or freeze because this is all about survival. And so this is something that I'm telling you right now will happen over the course of your career as a remote wellness practitioner. But here's the thing that you need to know when this happens. Notice when I say when, not if, because I'm telling you, it is going to happen and you want to be prepared for it. The biggest thing you want to remember is don't be afraid, don't be scared, don't be like, oh dang, I've screwed up. Right? You just got to remember, okay, Coach Yasin told me about that. Coach Yasin told me this was going to happen. And so if that happens, don't feel bad. Just have compassion for that part of your student that feels unsafe and work on using the skills that you are learning in this module to be able to get back into rapport so that way your student can actually relax and be honest and vulnerable. Because always remember, without rapport, coaching and transformation techniques will backfire. This is the reason why rapport is so absolutely critical and so very, very, very important. Now, having said that, you might at this point be like, okay, I understand what rapport is now. I understand why rapport is important, but how do I actually do it, right? How do I actually get into rapport with somebody? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. How do you build rapport with somebody else? Guess what? You've already learned a lot of the ways to actually get into rapport, right? Do you remember the conscious listening process that we talked about, right? We talked about conscious listening by itself. We talked about curious exploration. In this training, we are talking about matching and mirroring. And then in the next training, we're going to be talking about paraphrasing and verbal mirroring, right? And so yes, these core four are how you actually get into rapport with somebody. They are literally the foundation of what someone needs in order to allow them to feel comfortable and safe around you. Pretty cool, huh? So you're literally learning this exact strategy in order to be able to get into rapport with somebody. And so how do you build rapport? Conscious listening, we've already talked about that. Curious exploration, we've already talked about that. We're talking about matching and mirroring. And then in the very next training, we're going to be talking about paraphrasing and verbal mirroring. So that way you have all of the four foundational core skills to really be able to actually build rapport with anyone because of the conscious listening process. And so now that we've gone ahead and actually gone through a mini section about rapport, we're now going to go ahead and dive back into the original question that we started this entire training with, which is, wait a second, what is matching and mirroring actually? So now that we understand that it's a way in order to develop rapport, let's go ahead and talk about matching and mirroring specifically. And so matching and mirroring are psychology principles that behavioral experts noticed that when people are feeling safe and comfortable around each other, they will actually match and mirror each other in different ways. And so matching and mirroring is really all about making the person that you are listening to feel as though you are similar or the same as them, and you are literally in the same physical and mental state as them. And so why is this so powerful? Because at the end of the day, you want to remember this. People like people who are like themselves, and people don't like people who are not like themselves. Regardless of how you feel about that, regardless of how you think the world should actually be, the truth is that you cannot rewire the human blueprint the way that we are psychologically designed and wired. The truth is that this is how human beings are and will be for the foreseeable future. Unless millions of years down the road, all of a sudden we've gone ahead and somehow evolved to not be human beings anymore. The truth is that we are the way that we are right now. And this is a fact in the way that the world works. And so if you can be like someone, or you can make them feel like you are like them by using matching and mirroring, then they are much more likely to actually know, like, and trust you. And here's the cool thing about this. We are doing this consciously, and we are doing this deliberately. That is the beauty of actually learning a skill, is that it actually allows you to not do this unconsciously, not to have to literally leave it up to chance whether this is going to happen. You can actually design this and consciously and deliberately do this. And so what happens is that when you consciously sync up with other people using matching and mirroring in ways that aren't very noticeable, then you can get people to unconsciously think, man, I really like this person. I'm not sure why, but I just do. And they won't realize why they are thinking and feeling that, but you will know why. Because you are working with their psychology and their physiology to make their mind and body think and realize, hey, this is a friend, this is someone like me, and so therefore I actually like them. I actually like to spend time with them. And so mirroring and matching and the rest of the skills in the conscious listening process is really going to become your magic little secret to why people, just for some weird reason, love you more than they love other people. How cool is that, right? And so at the end of the day, this is the power of what it is that we are talking about. All of this is extremely cool, extremely neat stuff, because we are literally uncovering under the hood of the human mind and the human body and literally hacking our way to becoming what people call a people person. Well, guess what? You can do it consciously and deliberately by learning these skills. This is how cool all of what we are talking about right now actually is. And so just to emphasize how powerful all of these things are, I want to go ahead and show you an example of matching and mirroring in politics, because a great place to actually see world-class influence tactics like matching and mirroring is in global politics. Why? Because countries and world leaders are on the biggest stage in the world and have the highest stakes, and so they are experts in influence and communication. If you look at some of the largest statesmen, right, they are masters of this process of matching and mirroring because they have to build rapport with other world leaders in order to negotiate, etc., right? An example of this is former President Barack Obama, right? Regardless of what you think of him politically, right? I'm saying, hey, put that aside for a second. You don't have to necessarily like someone in order to learn from them. The truth is that it is very hard to deny that probably he's pretty good at communication, right? If you just hear him speak and the way he communicates, you'll see what I mean. And so here are just some quick examples of him using matching and mirroring in order to get into rapport. And it's very similar nonverbal cues in order to actually get in sync with the other person, right? So here he is with the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And so you can see here, matching and mirroring is happening there, matching and mirroring is happening here. And for some reason, I just pulled out 3 British examples. And so here he is with Prince William from the UK. Again, I don't know why I pulled out 3 British examples, but you can see here very clearly and very evidently, right? You're seeing the matching and mirroring that is going on very consciously and very deliberately in order to be able to facilitate and create that environment of know, like, and trust. This is what's going on at the highest levels behind the scenes. And you might actually realize, oh, dang, there are people out there that, hey, they've been doing this to me. And that's the reason why I actually know, like, and trust them. And so it is an art. It's something that you can learn. It is a skill. And that's exactly what it is that you are learning inside of this training and inside of this module as a whole. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on from here. Is that now that we understand a little bit of what matching and mirroring is, the question is, what's the difference between the two, right? Right now, we're talking about this concept, matching and mirroring, and we're saying like, hey, are they exactly the same? What's actually the difference between both of them? So let's go ahead and talk about that. Matching versus mirroring. So in most trainings about influence and coaching and psychology, unfortunately, they don't do a very good job of explaining the difference between these two. And that's why here at RWA, we want to make sure that you guys have the top-notch education about how to be the best coach on the planet. And so in order to do that, I want to go ahead and delineate between these two, right? Because a lot of times, many of these other trainings will bundle both matching and mirroring together. And oftentimes they will actually confuse both and use examples of, hey, this is mirroring, but it's actually matching, okay? So the truth is that both of these concepts are different because matching is doing or saying similar to what the person is doing or saying. And mirroring is doing or saying exactly what the other person is doing or saying, okay? So example of matching is if the person you are communicating with is talking slow, you also slow down, right? So you're matching their pace of talking. A mirroring example is if the person crosses their right leg, you cross your left leg. And so you are a mirror image of that person. So these are examples of the difference between matching and mirroring. Now, the thing that you have to know about this is that we actually do use matching more than we use mirroring, okay? This is very important to understand, is that too many newbie coaches, when they first hear about the importance of mirroring in order to build rapport, they try to make things too technical, okay? They think, okay, I'm going to go ahead and mirror every little thing that this person does or says. And then they end up getting extremely weird about it. They end up thinking more about mirroring the person than being in the conversation, and then they just botch everything up. Here's the truth. In most situations, trying to mirror everything that somebody else does is just overkill. So for that reason, in this training and what we mainly practice, we are going to be talking more about matching than we do mirroring. And so even though we are going to be talking about matching more than mirroring, it's still important to know that yes, mirroring does exist, and yes, it is closely related to matching. Does that make sense? And so you just want to know that, hey, people do interchangeably use these two concepts. And so that way you don't want to get confused. You want to know the difference between the two. And that way you also can actually understand that, okay, we are going to be using matching more than mirroring. And then in the next training, when we talk about verbal mirroring, we're going to talk a little bit more about the situations in which we use each of them. Beautiful. So we are chugging along here. The very next question that you might ask is, okay, now that I understand what matching and mirroring are, how do I actually do them? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. How do good listeners actually match and mirror? And so remember, even though we are not talking about conscious listening specifically anymore, what we are still doing is we are talking about the process of conscious listening. And so what we're going to do is we're going to continue our theme of what good listeners do so masterfully when it comes to matching and mirroring. Remember, we're talking about the conscious listening process. And because matching and mirroring is a part of that process, it's really what good listeners do as you're going through this entire process. Okay, so how good listeners match and mirror during a conversation, what they actually do. So while good listeners are, number one, consciously listening, number two, curiously exploring, number three, paraphrasing and verbal mirroring, which is what you're going to learn in the next training, they are also in the background matching and mirroring. But here's the difference. Unlike the other skills in the conscious listening process, matching and mirroring actually happens more on the in-between level, right? Because when you think about, okay, conscious listening, there's like a very specific way that you're consciously listening, right? Curious exploration, there's a very specific wording and questions that you are asking, right? Paraphrasing and verbal mirroring, as you're going to learn in the next training, it's very specific on how to do it. But the thing is with matching and mirroring, there are no specific words that we say, but it's more so how we say the words and do the actions that matters, okay? This is going to sound a little bit vague and abstract, but it's going to make more sense to you as we go along here, okay? So what good listeners do to match the speaker, what they are doing is they're matching voice, they're matching body language, they're matching energy, they're matching words and vocab, and they are matching writing, okay? And so we're going to go ahead and talk about each of these, but I do want to go ahead and remind you very quickly is that remember, communication is 38% about voice inflections and 55% about body language. And so the more that we can match the voice inflections and the body language of the speaker, of the person that we are listening to, of the person that we are communicating with, the more in sync we are going to be with the other person, right? And so this is why you're going to start to understand that the other skills in the conscious listening process, it's like things that we do. But then matching and mirroring is more of like things that we are matching with the other person, right? So that's how that actually kind of works. And so let's go ahead and talk about each of those 5 things that good listeners do in order to actually match the person that they are having a conversation with. So the very first thing that good listeners do is that they match voice, okay? Now, I want to go ahead and emphasize here. I'm going to start with what not to match. We do not match accents and dialects and that kind of stuff, okay? Why? Because that's offensive. If you're not British, don't try to do a British accent. Personally, even though my parents are from Britain and the UK, guess what? I do not have a British accent and I suck at doing British accents. And so it's offensive if I'm talking to a British person and I'm trying to match their accent and I don't actually have a British accent. So we don't match that, right? The other thing is that we actually don't match the type of voice that the person has, right? And so, for example, if I'm a guy, I'm a man, and I go ahead and say I'm speaking with a woman and I go ahead and try to make my voice into sounding like a woman's voice, that's offensive. I'm not going to try that, right? So what is it that we actually do match? What we match is we match the speed and the volume of how the person is speaking, right? So if someone is talking soft and quiet, right? If you come in and just yell, they're going to think that you're rude, right? And so what you want to do is you want to be able to match that, hey, if they're talking quietly and they're talking softly, I'm also going to come in and talk quietly, and I'm also going to come in and talk softly, right? And so that way the person, you can see how it changed the volume of my voice, right? The person is going to think, hey, this person is like me and they get me, right? In the same way, if someone is talking quickly and loudly, then you're going to match that versus if someone is speaking very slowly, and then all of a sudden, if I come in and I talk very fast, then it's going to break the rapport with them, right? So you can see how I'm matching their voice, and just by doing that, just by doing this one simple thing, it's very easy to do. Don't even worry about the other 4 that we're going to be talking about. Just this one thing, just matching their voice and how good listeners do that is going to automatically start putting you into rapport with somebody else that you're having a conversation with. It's so powerful. Imagine what happens when you actually stack the other 4 that we're going to go ahead and talk about next. Very, very powerful stuff, right? Let's go ahead and talk about the next thing, which is actually matching body language, right? Looking at and observing, hey, how is the other person sitting? Are they using hand motions? Are their hands crossed or they're not? Leaning into the conversation, leaning out of the conversation. And so what you're doing is you're matching that. And the reason why this is so powerful is because remember, like we just talked about, body language makes up 55% of communication. And so when you can match the body language of the other person, and you can start to put yourself into their physical state, it becomes very powerful. Now, a quick note that I want to go ahead and make here is that typically when people are talking about matching body language, sometimes that's when they talk about mirroring, and they'll use the word mirroring here. And so that's why there is some interchangeableness going on between matching and mirroring. I just want to go ahead and make that quick note for you, okay? So that is the second thing. The third thing that we're going to go ahead and talk about now is matching energy, okay? Now, matching energy is a combination of voice and body language, right? So energy is that intangible element that you sense. And so if someone has low energy and you come in with high energy, then what ends up happening is that it can be a little bit jarring for them, right? It can throw you out of rapport. In the same way, if somebody has high energy, right? And then all of a sudden I come in with like a low energy, I'm pessimistic, I'm down, then all of a sudden they're going to be like, yo, something's off here. And so they're not able to actually communicate because they're thinking, whoa, what's going on with this person's energy? And so when you actually match the energy level, then you are in sync. And then all of a sudden the person doesn't have to think about, oh, why is this person's energy high? Why is this person's energy low? Whatever. They can just communicate effectively. Now, in regards to energy, I do want to go ahead and make this very important note, is that you can use this to actually change someone's energy as well. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about mismatching later on inside of this training. So just a quick note there is that, hey, just because somebody is low energy, does that mean that I have to become pessimistic and low energy with them in order to get into a rapport? No, we're going to talk a little bit about how to use mismatching in order to help change other people's energy as well. But regardless, that is number 3 of what good listeners actually do. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about number 4. And number 4 is all about matching words and vocabulary. And so an example of this is, hey, if somebody's using academic and scientific words versus somebody is using laid back, chill vocabulary, right? And so if someone is using chill slang words, and then all of a sudden I come in and I start using academic, sophisticated biology, physiology, whatever, right? What it does is it breaks rapport. And so you want to be able to match their words and their vocabulary so that way you can be in sync with them. And so when we use similar words and vocab, what it does is it allows us to be able to get into the same wavelength with the other person. So the other person isn't having to think, this guy's trying to use different words than me. Does he think that he's better than me? Does she think that she's better than me? Right? How should I communicate? All of that is out the window, and that way you match them, so that way you can just have effective communication back and forth and get your point and ideas across. That is number 4, which is matching words and vocabulary. And then finally is matching writing. Especially in today's world, a lot of communication is via text. And so it's very powerful to learn how to be able to match writing style, so that way you can be in rapport with someone virtually. Let's go through a couple examples of this, right? So example number 1 is the person says, hey, Yasin, did you get that project done? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Can't wait to see you tomorrow morning, exclamation point, happy face emoji, right? And then you say, hey, John, yes, I did. Same. Thanks for the reminder email, happy face emoji. Or I would say that, right? Example 2, person, I will pick you up at 5 p.m., period. Awesome, period, right? Example 3, hey, I'm going to pick you up at 5 p.m., emoji. And then you match their level, right? You match their writing style. Awesome, exclamation point, emoji. And so what's happening is that you're matching their writing style or energy via text. And what that does is it helps you get into rapport with them, and it helps them feel comfortable to know, hey, okay, they are feeling the same thing. They are thinking the same thing. They're in rapport with me. And so they're not sitting there trying to decipher, okay, what does this actually mean? Why is this person giving emojis? Right? And so all of a sudden you're in the same level, matching them. So that way communication can happen effectively back and forth. Okay, so that is the 5th way that good listeners actually match the speaker. So just as a quick recap, matching the voice, matching the body language, matching the energy, words and vocab, and writing. And so here's the thing. Here's the cool thing about this is that when you do matching properly, what's going to happen is that people are going to say things like, man, you know what? I just love being with you. Man, you just get me. I feel so comfortable around you. And then in the back of your head, you're just thinking, wow, literally all I did was just match them. Like it wasn't even that hard, right? And so do not be shocked when you hear these things and you actually start practicing these ninja secrets to influence and rapport. And then all of a sudden people around you start saying these things. This is the skill that you are learning. Remember, you're learning the knowledge, you're going to put in the action, aka the reps, and that's when you're going to actually acquire the skill. Pretty cool, huh? Exactly. And so real quick note here, I do want to go ahead and mention this, is that you will notice that we didn't really talk about mirroring here, right? And so in the same way that we talked about matching versus mirroring, in most situations, using exact mirroring is actually going to be more stressful for you than helpful. And so what we do is we normally use mirroring more in a verbal way, right? So we go ahead and the words that we say, and that is what we're going to be talking about in the next skill when we talk about paraphrasing and verbal mirroring. But we use matching when it comes to more of the body and the voice. So we go ahead and match body and voice, and then mirroring is about the words that we say, and that's what we're going to talk about inside of the next training. I hope that makes sense. Just stick with me here. Once you get through the next training, it's going to make more sense. But the bottom line for this is that by focusing more on matching, when we talk about body and voice, we avoid the problem of forcing it and making things weird because we're literally trying to mimic or copy the other person, right? It becomes like a Simon Says, or it kind of becomes like, hey, why are you copying me? What's going on here? So we avoid that. And instead we match, we do things that are similar, so that way it doesn't get weird, okay? So matching comes more naturally naturally than mirroring when it comes to body and voice. And so that's kind of the difference between the two. And then when we get to the next skill, that's where we're going to talk a little bit more about mirroring and verbal mirroring in specific. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. We are making strides here inside of this training. Now, as we start to talk about how to actually do matching, what I do want to go ahead and talk to you about is mismatching. Now, mismatching is very important because I want to talk to you about the opposite of what matching actually is, right? So if we say that matching is all about saying or doing things that are similar to the other person in order to get in sync, then mismatching is about saying or doing things that are the opposite to the other person in order to break the sync, right? And so we know that matching works because we can see very clearly how mismatching works, right? An example of this is that, let's say you're in a deep conversation, you're in sync with someone, right? And then all of a sudden you look at your watch. What does that do? It breaks that sync, right? And so we can see clearly that mismatching is a thing. And so mismatching is kind of like a pattern interrupt. That's what we call it in influence, okay? When we talk about influence and that kind of stuff, pattern interrupt is the phrase that they sometimes use, is that what it does is it stops the other person. It breaks what they're actually thinking. It breaks their frame that they are actually in. And so obviously, the goal in general is to avoid mismatching if we are trying to get into rapport. Obvious, right? We've literally just talked all about the importance of rapport and getting into rapport. So we want to avoid mismatching. However, this is very important, is that we can actually use mismatching to our advantage as well. And that's what I want to go ahead and talk to you about right now and give you a couple examples of how we can actually use mismatching to our advantage. So the very first example of how we can use mismatching to our advantage is when somebody is rambling on, right? And so when we use mismatching, what we can do is we can break the flow of this person who's just rambling on. They keep on talking. And so we can use mismatching in order to either get a word in or maybe change the topic or switch gears or something like that, okay? And so an example of this is like, hey, turning your body away, for example, right? Or looking at your watch. Those are examples of mismatching in order to actually have a pattern interrupt. So that way the person can get out of their frame. We can get out of sync for a second. And then all of a sudden we can regain control of the conversation if that's what we're trying to do. Or we can get a word in or something like that, right? Now, it's very important to note, we can get creative with this and we want to do it in a respectful way. We don't want to just be like, hey, barge in, what are you doing? And then mismatch all of a sudden and get out of sync because of the fact that we are being disrespectful. So very important there. We can help somebody who might be rambling on. They might be a little bit lost in their train of thought, that kind of stuff. We can use mismatching to our advantage for that. Number two is that when we are trying to introduce a third person into the conversation, right? And so sometimes you might have experienced this. You're in sync with somebody, you're going back and forth, and then in the back of your head, you're like, you know what? I want to introduce this other person in this conversation, but this other person is like in sync with me. How do I actually introduce this other person? So if you and another person are talking, you can actually use mismatching in order to break the sync momentarily in order to introduce a third person into the conversation. So example is like what you would do is like you would look at the third person. So you would break the eye contact, right? Breaking the eye contact with the person you're talking to. That's the example of the mismatching. And then what you would do is you would instead make eye contact with the third person that you want to introduce into this conversation. So by breaking eye contact and looking at that third person, the person you're talking to is going to be like, oh, where are you looking, right? They're going to try to follow you. They're going to try to match you. And then they're going to see, oh, okay, there's this other person that's trying to enter the conversation. And then all of a sudden you've made that space to be able to introduce another person into the conversation there. So you're seeing this, right? This is an art. This is really like, it's kind of like you're painting here. It's kind of like you're painting with human interaction and you're becoming somebody who's a master at human interaction to be able to kind of non-verbally, subconsciously be able to play with the mind and the body to be able to create results with people and becoming more of that people type person. But you're doing this consciously and you're doing it deliberately. Very, very cool stuff, okay? Number 3 on here, how we can use mismatching to our advantage. Number 3 is to disarm the person. Because here's the thing. If someone comes into a conversation with you and they have very aggressive body language, they have very aggressive vocal tone, maybe they're loud, they're abrasive, right? You don't want to match that. What you want to do is you want to de-escalate the situation and you want to disarm them, right? How do you do that? By mismatching, by doing the opposite of what that person is doing. Okay, so example, right? Let's say you get on a call with a prospective student and what they are doing is they're very aggressive. Hey, just tell me how much you charge for this, right? They're very aggressive. Now, your initial reaction is you would want to match their intensity and be rude and blunt and rough right back to them, right? But instead, you can actually disarm them by mismatching and using a calm voice and saying, sure, hey, no problem, absolutely, right? Why don't you tell me what you're looking for? And so the person feels, okay, wait a second, this person is in a different relaxed state. I don't have to be as tense. And so as a result, they're starting to get disarmed. And then what you're going to find is that they're going to actually start usually matching you over the course of the conversation within 5 or 10 minutes. But here's the key. You have to make sure that you are consistent. You can't get riled up because of the fact that they're riled up and they're being aggressive. And so it's very key. This is how you become a master at using this nonverbal communication and influence to be able to help people, right? You got to be able to keep calm. And then what you're going to find is that that person is going to match you because you are consciously slowing down, you're calming down, you're using a calm voice, you're doing calm body language, all of that kind of stuff, okay? And so by using mismatching to disarm, you will be shocked at how effective it is to take somebody from a high aggressive level down to becoming relaxed when you actually do this properly, okay? And so these are just 3 examples of how you can use mismatching to your advantage on how we can actually use this skill. And so the bottom line of this is that in most situations, we want to avoid mismatching because we don't want to break rapport. However, there are cases in which we are going to use mismatching to our advantage. And so this is why I've gone ahead and put together this meme for you on here. Pretty neat, huh? And so this is the first time I know that some of you already may be exposed to some of these tactics and, understandings and strategies. For some of you, this might be newer. For some of you, this is a refinement. You're like, wow, I've never heard all of this spoken in this way. But really, this is some of the coolest things that you can do. And that's why we call this the art of transformation. That's why we call this the art of coaching. Because of the fact that it really is an art. It's something that you are doing that's intangible, that is happening behind the scenes, that you are able to go ahead and influence others and be able to get that know, like, and trust factor behind the scenes. Beautiful. Now, real quick, I do want to go ahead and touch base on, we did actually not talk yet about why matching and mirroring is important. I know at this point, you might understand intangibly why matching and mirroring is important, but I do want to go ahead and make some specific points about this very quickly, okay? Is that matching and mirroring instantly puts you into rapport with someone else, right? Because when you match a student's voice tone, their volume, their speed, what you do is you're getting into their physiological state. It puts you into a similar physical and mental state to them. And what does this do? What it does is it gives you access to information that is unconsciously being communicated, right? You're going to pick up on information without the other person being consciously aware of how you actually got it. How? Because when you are matching the listener's physiology, what you are doing is you're getting into the same state as them. And that gives you information about their unconscious mind, right? All of a sudden, you're in the same state as them, and then you can start to observe, okay, how am I feeling right now? What is it that I am thinking right now? Why am I observing that? Because of the fact that I've put myself voluntarily, consciously, deliberately into the same physiological state as them. And so you are noticing information that is located within their physical state, aka their body, and their mental state, aka their mind, all because of the fact that you match them. And so you become aware of things that are unspoken and not said because you yourself are putting yourself into the listener's situation. Make sense? This is some very, very cool stuff. I'm really excited that you are learning this. And that is the reason why matching and mirroring is so very critical and important, okay? A couple other points on here. Why else is matching and mirroring so important? Well, because of the fact that everything we talked about, when we talked about conscious listening, we talked about curious exploration, we talked about the importance of those things and why those things are important. Well, because matching and mirroring is a part of that process, all of those things also apply to matching and mirroring. And so matching and mirroring, hey, shows the other person that you understand them, shows them that you care, shows them that you're interested, shows them that they feel heard, it lets them understand that they are understood. It helps build trust. It helps build rapport. And so when you use matching and mirroring, it helps the other person feel safe and it helps them feel like you are like them. And so they start to like you. This is the bottom line reason of why matching and mirroring is so dang important, okay? And so as we start to close out this training here, I do want to go ahead and talk to you about what is next. Because now that we've actually gone ahead and learned the knowledge piece of what matching and mirroring is, what rapport is, why it's important, how to actually do matching and mirroring, it's very important to understand that that is only the knowledge piece of this skill, right? Very shortly, you are going to have to put that into practice. You are going to have to do action with it. You are going to have to get the reps. And that is exactly what we are going to do inside of skill session number 2. However, we are going to be pairing up the skill that comes right after this, which is paraphrasing and verbal mirroring. And we're going to go ahead and pair those two skills up so that way we can practice both of them inside of skill session number 2. Okay, so hang in there. We're going to get through one more skill, and then that way we will be ready to go ahead and do the skill session from there. Okay, so as we go ahead and close out this training, we want to go ahead and talk about your engagement question. You want to go ahead and let us know inside of the engagement question for this specific training, which is, hey, fill in the blank. I thought this training was blank. This training for me was mind-blowing, amazing, whatever the training was for you. And what did you like and enjoy about this training? And what were some of your biggest takeaways or ahas from this training as well? Okay, let's go ahead and talk about your action steps here. Again, as typical here inside of module number 4, very straightforward action steps. Number 1, watch and study this training in full, and then make sure that you do actually complete the engagement question for this training. Go ahead and let us know what you thought about this training. And so with that being said, I am super excited to catch you in the next skill, and I will catch you inside of the next training.